We are going to quickly finish up with synapses so that we can move on to neuroanatomy. We still have some chemicals to talk about, so the hormones, and I still have one more type of a synapse. So hormones are chemicals that are secreted by cells in one part of the body, and they're actually conveyed by the blood so that they can influence other cells in other parts of the body. And your author, I think it's your author, that has this nice analogy of a neurotransmitter being like a telephone signal that we are calling, or we are sending the message to the specific neuron or neurons. We can have a little conference call, the neurons that we need to communicate to. Hormones are more like a radio signal. So we send out this signal through the body, and we can have an influence on whichever cells are recognizing these hormones, regardless of where they are in the body. And those neuropeptides, those neuromodulators, are more intermediate. I actually like the analogy to be more like the neuropeptides are like an FM radio. So if you're tuned to my channel and you're pretty close by, you can get my signal. And hormones more like an AM channel, or more like maybe even ham radio. So anywhere in the world that I want to send my signal, is if I'm on a certain radio station and you're tuned to my radio station, you can get my signal regardless of where you are in the world. Just talking in the body instead of the world. And your author gives this nice picture of the major endocrine glands. I feel like there's a lot to learn in this class, and I'm not teaching endocrinology, and the endocrine system is so complicated that for the most part, especially whichever one we get into of ingestive behaviors or reproductive behaviors, we'll talk about those relevant endocrine glands when they become relevant. But it's right now what you want to know about is what's going on in the brain. So I'll be talking about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland as really the major control of this endocrine system. There are various types of hormones, and they are all these chains of amino acids. So protein hormones are longer chains of amino acids, and peptide hormones are shorter chains. Hormones attach to membrane receptors where they activate a second messenger. So they have this, they act like a metabotropic synapse. And the circulating hormones are going to modify brain activity, and then hormones secreted by the brain are going to control the secretion of other hormones. And I'm going to show all this. This is just a summary of what I'm going to show with some pictures here. So the pituitary gland is a small gland. They're at the base of the brain. It is attached to the hypothalamus. And there are actually two distinct glands of the pituitary, the anterior gland, or the anterior pituitary, which is this glandular tissue, and the posterior pituitary, which is neural tissue really extending down from the hypothalamus. So it can be considered an extension of the hypothalamus. So I start here with the posterior pituitary. And so these neurons in the hypothalamus are doing it's the hypothalamus that is synthesizing the hormones oxytocin and vasopressin, this antidiuretic hormone. And these migrate down to the posterior pituitary, and then they get released from there into the bloodstream. The anterior pituitary is that glandular tissue, and it's doing its own synthesizing of hormones. The hypothalamus has this relationship with it where it is going to inhibit or stimulate the release of those hormones by secreting a releasing factor, or what's a releasing hormone. That's going to flow through the blood to the anterior pituitary to communicate to it, to either, again, inhibit the release or stimulate the release. I have some examples there: growth hormones, gonadotropins, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. You don't need to know all of the hormones. Again, there's a lot to the endocrine system, and just kind of knowing generally right now how it works is fine. And when these hormones become relevant, that's when you'll want to know them. The hypothalamus is having its effect on the anterior pituitary, and then vice versa. We have this negative feedback kind of system, or this loop in the communication. So the hypothalamus is going to release its releasing hormone. In the example here, this is the thyroid stimulating hormone, releasing hormone. And the anterior pituitary releases its TSH, its thyroid stimulating hormone. It's going to then communicate to the thyroid gland, and it's going to release its hormones. And so all those green arrows are excitatory effects. I'm releasing my hormones from the thyroid gland, and you can see this inhibitory effect. As those hormones are released in the body, they go back up into the brain and communicate to the hypothalamus to decrease the secretion of the releasing hormone, so that we feed back and say we had kind of like we did with the nitric oxide and recognizing my own neurotransmitters, that it slows down the further communication once we have those hormones in the system. And as they get low, the hypothalamus will start secreting its releasing hormone again. So we've talked now about inotropic reactions of receptors, where we need that faster transmission of information, as in vision and hearing, and metabotropic reactions or metabotropic receptors, where instead of just letting the ions through and changing the voltage of the cell, we're going to do something. We're going to communicate to a second messenger. We might have some effect on genetic expression or the metabolism of the cell. We might also let in ions, but those are slower reactions and longer lasting reactions. Well, we also have a few special purpose synapses that convey messages electrically with this really fast transmission, faster than chemical transmission. And this is important when we have two cells that need to behave in exact synchrony with one another. Your author gives the example of some of those cells that control rhythmic breathing. So we need to breathe, those cells need to be doing the same thing at exactly the same time. And sometimes I see that prey animals, their sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight response, some of those cells have this kind of electrical synapse that allows them to move very quickly. And again, the cells behaving with exact synchrony. And this is these electrical synapses. So this is where the membrane of the presynaptic neuron is going to come into direct contact with the membrane of the postsynaptic neuron. And you can see it in the picture, and at the bottom there you can see these pores, those channels line up. So basically the presynaptic neuron is sharing its ions with the postsynaptic neuron. So this is just a quick electrical change. And this is happening at what's called a gap junction. Okay, where those pores are lining up and those neurons are communicating is the gap junction between those two neurons in our electrical synapse.